Evening, everyone. We are live for another live stream of the Sports Refuge Podcast. I am Earl Holland, and here with me is someone I had the opportunity to work with. It feels like a very long time ago, and I feel like that's how I start every story. And I go like, stop. You've already heard this before, stop me if you've heard this before, something along those lines. I can't even get it out. But Jenny Hopkinson, who I'll let you tell everyone your title, but you've worked pretty much a lot of places in the journalism field, and I think it'd be better off just to let you describe your current position as well as a little bit of your resume. Of course, Jenny, I'm glad to have you here on the podcast. Thank you for being a part of this. And this is, before we go into that, this is one question I have to ask because I know you're super enthusiastic about being on. What made you decide to be a guest on the show?
Oh my gosh, Earl. First of all, yes, I'm very pumped. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, second of all, the invitation was to talk about hockey and journalism on like your sports podcast, which is like things that I could talk about endlessly, like, and kind of the opportunity to reconnect with you and kind of reminisce about our youth. Let's call a spade a spade. And I would be remiss not to mention this. I'm on a sports podcast during the Olympics, and I love the Olympics. It's like that combination of like the human spirit and people throwing their bodies in like really impressive ways. I've had it on in the background all week. I'm currently watching the women's marathon swim, if anyone's wondering. I love this event. They have to swim for a 10K in open water, which is stupid. That's so far. So anyway, yes, I'm very excited to be here. And yeah, as you pointed out, I've had a bunch of different jobs, mostly in journalism, and then mostly that built off of that. For the record, Earl and I met because we both worked at the Daily Times. Like I was there from 2008 to 2010. So I'm going to do my resume backwards, I think is the moral of the story. So I was there with you from 2008 to 2010. I covered Worcester County. It was my first job out of college. I was 21 years old. I lived off of like cheap beer at the beach because I couldn't afford anything else. It's like $1 natty beer, their $1 natty lighter bust for me. And I covered Worcester County for the Daily Times. And I did that for 2 years. And that's when I met Earl and like a bunch of other esteemed individuals that have been on this podcast. I'm kind of looking at you, Ben Pinsurga. So I feel like I'm kind of back among friends. And that was a super cool experience to work on the shore. I'm from Southern Connecticut. I'd never been there before. Make a plug for working for a paper anywhere is that you learn a ton about yourself. You learn basically how to do anything, and how to kind of work with people through anything because you just kind of have to. So I left the shore in 2010. I moved to DC. I actually left because I thought no one else at the paper was leaving, and so I felt like I'd just be stuck on the same beat forever, and that turned out not to be true. Shortly after I left, so many other people left. But so I moved to DC, and I worked for a pretty small, like very nerdy policy publication covering the EPA, which is a job I got because when I worked in Worcester County, there's this big lawsuit about a poultry farm that was allegedly polluting a river. It wasn't, the pollution wasn't coming from what environmentalists said it was. But anyway, it was this big federal case, and I was covering it on the shore, and this policy publication in DC was also covering it. So the day of my interview, I walked in and said, well, yesterday I wrote about this that's federally related. And the editor who was interviewing me grabbed the clip that I handed him and walked out, didn't say anything. And turns out he handed it to one of their reporters and said, you missed something. Anyway, I got that job. So I did that for 3 years, and then I went to Politico. And the move to Politico was kind of an interesting one. I covered environmental policy in DC for those 3 years. And then Politico at the time was launching a like food and agriculture policy section, which I was weirdly kind of perfect for, right? Like I'd worked in poultry country. I knew a ton about kind of like USDA programs and EPA programs that kind of work with farmers, and kind of those intersections of all of that, and kind of what it looks like on the ground to be in a rural community and how these federal programs really affect those. And then I'd spent 3 years covering environmental policy, so I knew all about pesticides and clean water and all of this stuff. So I was at Politico for almost 5 years. And while I was there, super cool experiences. I got to work in Brussels for a couple of months, also covering ag policy. And then I guess I gotta think now. So in 2017, I was kind of looking around, wondering what to do next. And I could either go and be a reporter somewhere else on a different beat, or I could stay in ag policy. But I didn't feel like I could do both because there's just not that many places covering policy in the way that Politico was. So I decided to take this head filled with policy knowledge or ag policy knowledge in particular. And I was not there for long, but I went to the Congressional Research Service, which is like the research arm of Congress. Basically, like a lawmaker can have a question about something, and I was the ag trade expert on staff. So that was 13 months. It was a jarringly slow pace compared to being in a newsroom. So I learned a lot about myself then, and kind of the universe I came from, and what other places, kind of the pace they worked. And then, did that for about a year, then stayed in the ag policy lane and decided that let's take a real run at this. And so I went and I was a lobbyist for an organization called the National Farmers Union, which is basically the nation's second largest general farm organization that leans slightly progressive. It's just left of center. So that was a really great opportunity. I learned a lot more about agriculture on the ground from the folks that I worked for, and spent a lot of time kind of out in the fields and really learning a lot, but also like really thinking a lot about Worcester and like that experience that I knew. And then actually earlier this year, I had the opportunity to go to basically a firm, and now I advise companies on ag policy, kind of government relations and communications. So it's kind of a weird, perfect marriage of someone who's like floated around journalism and Capitol Hill and, I don't know, had almost every cliched job in Washington. So yeah, this is where I am. Sometimes I like stop and think about like my career started at my first assignment in Worcester was the Ocean City like firefighters parade in the summer of 2008. So like, and I think about that from time to time. Like, wait, how did I get here? And I don't know if you have those same moments as like a fellow recovering journalist, where you're like, didn't expect things to pan out like this.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that, because I remember before I even got into being a full-time newspaper reporter, I had been doing a number of odd jobs. I was working toll booth in the Ocean City Inlet parking lot. I was doing board opping for a radio station. Plus, I was stringing for the newspaper. Gwen Garland had got me started in stringing and doing some business stories. So before that, it's like, I can't believe it. Then it became this sole reporter in training position, which ended up being really thrown in the fire as doing a lot of reporter stuff. First day, covered a track meet and a guy who pretty much died in a house fire. So those were two stories. Yes, they were two stories. I was still waiting to hear back from the fire department. Like, time to go to Snow Hill for the track meet that was going on at the Worcester County Rec Center. But it was pretty much, I look back at it and all the different things that I've done. It's like, man, there's so many different things, but I think you work in a smaller newsroom, you find out. And what is one of my coworkers at my job now, because it's peppered full of former Gannett newspaper employers from newspaper writers from New Jersey and stuff like that. And they basically say sometimes you never notice it, but you might be subject to PTSD in the newsroom and you don't really think about it. Some of the stuff that you see that you really, it may not even hit you. And it's like I said, well, I saw a kid get pulled from the Wycomico River, not to make it sound dark, but you see little things like that. And it's like, well, yeah, that happened. And you just keep moving.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. Like nothing, like community journalism, right? You like, first of all, nothing is more interesting than the truth, right? Like, and we can go dark there, but like some of the things that happen, you're just like, this isn't a thing. I mean, even just this summer, right? Like Ocean City's fireworks accidentally set off before 4th of July, like in the morning of 4th of July. Just, like, it's just so funny. And like, there's so many little things that you learn from being a community reporter and people's stories that you're just like, this is crazy. Like, the truth is so much more, you can't make this stuff up. Truth is so much more interesting than fiction. One of my favorite fun facts about Worcester County is that when whales wash up on Ocean City's shores, they are buried in the Ocean City Airport infield, because it's a couple of miles inland. And like they don't have any space on the peninsula to do it, and that's the only land that like Ocean City has off the island, from what I know or what I remember. And like one day, like, does erosion get all the way back to the airport and they find a bunch of whale bones like 2 miles inland from the coast? Like, think about that. But yeah, there's so many. I mean, it's so true. The stories, your first day was more stressful than my parade, though I remember that being real stressful. The stories, the people, like, it's just it's such a trip, and it's why recovering journalists like ourselves sit around and reminisce, I guess.
Oh yeah, and that's the crazy thing about it. It's like, I just think of so many stories, and as I've mentioned, I feel like I mention this all the time when I do the journalism centric episodes, that I considered cops and courts and sports very, very similar in coverage, because what you see in a courtroom is like what you see on a basketball court or sports field. No one can spin it whatever way they want. You see it with your own eyes, what happened, and what you see there is the truth, or at least what you hear is the word from either, I guess in the case of a court case, either you hear it from the defendant, someone on the stand, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and things like that. The same thing you see, the action that you see on the court is no different than what you see in the courtroom.
That's interesting. I never thought about that. And this is where I admit I never covered sports, which is wise. I shouldn't have covered sports. But yeah, that's interesting. That's a good take on it. I like that.
Yeah, and you don't have to FOIA anything in either case.
Oh my gosh, you don't have to FOIA anything. That's true. That is.
It's funny. I always talk about, for the longest time, when Sharon always wanted to cover, at least wanted to do one sports profile, and we were trying to get that happen. I know we were trying to get that happen. It was like, yeah, this would be a perfect idea. You should do a profile on this Shorebirds player, because it works. We have team access. It shouldn't be an issue and stuff like that. We just never were able to get it locked down. But like you'd say, when we mentioned Sharon's name, Sharon was, I feel like, I guess Renaissance woman when it comes to some of those things. When it comes to journalism, I feel like she lived a million lives in journalism and things like that. And but yeah, I see it like this. I always feel like this. There are some people that are so used to doing hard news and things like that if you throw a feature in their lap, and they are lost, and it shouldn't be that way. I feel like, just like another sports terminology, I always go with Bill Belichick on the New England Patriots. He has every single member of his coaching staff learn every single position, that, because if you're an offensive coordinator, you're going to learn what the quarterback and wide receiver does, but you should also learn special teams. You should learn defense, work with linebackers, things like that, because that way, one, it makes you more multifaceted, and two, and it makes you think differently, because it's always a counteraction to what the opposing side is going to do. And this way, you're very knowledgeable. And I feel like feature writing can give someone's work a little bit more heart and soul. But that's my opinion.
No, and that was like, again, like one of the fun parts about being in a community paper is that you kind of, again, except for the fact that I don't think I ever covered sports, so I'm sure if I look back, there's like it's not like a track meet, but there's something related. There's a feature somewhere. But like, you had to do everything, right? Like I covered Worcester County Commission, and I also had to cover like the, Celtic Festival in Snow Hill. Like, you had to do a bit of everything, which like made the fun, but also just meant that you could really kind of like learn how to do everything and learn how to write in different ways for different audiences. I mean, it's like the skills you learn are things that really carry you through. But also just writing well. a big rant about that because there are a lot of people can't write well. But that's a really good thing. And I still remember like James Fisher, like getting my copy in like the first couple of months and being like, we got to fix these things. I just come from University of Maryland's journalism school. So I like thought I was a big deal. And anyway, James very kindly fixed that, but that's another issue.
How did you get an interest in journalism? What was the big interest that you had in it? Did you write in high school? Did you write in middle school and things like that?
Yeah, so I was always a good writer. Like, I don't know, that was the thing I could do. And so when I was like 6 or 7, I don't know, 8, I don't know. And like my family got their first computer, and that dates me a bit, but you remember that, I'm sure, right? We're of the age that remembers that. And so I don't know, maybe I was a little bit older, but like, you know, we had this like really clunky software that you could like make your own newspaper. And I definitely made the Jenny Times and like sent it to family and did all that. So, you know, when I was in high school and I was managing editor of the high school paper, like my parents weren't surprised. So that's how I ended up at Maryland, because they had a good journalism program. And I liked that it was a big state school. A lot of journalism programs. I was between Maryland and BU at the end, and I felt like, you know, I went for an accepted students day at BU, and they were like, oh yeah, like, you know, Boston could be a really interesting city politically if John Kerry wins. And it's like, well, DC is going to be more interesting regardless of what happens. And of course, we know how John Kerry's presidential run ended. So I ended up in Maryland and really loved it. And had a great time, and like had class with Sharon, though I didn't really know her very well until we got to the Daily together. But yeah, I think it was one of those things that I was always, no one was surprised, I guess, when I got into it.
Yeah, what was the aspect of journalism that you liked the most? Was it telling stories? Was it finding more about people? I know there's so many different ways. I always see it like this. Some people, they're all about ferreting out the truth. There's other people who feel like everyone has a story to tell. There's so many unique things. And it, you know, a lot of people go different ways.
Yeah, I liked the storytelling. And I think that goes back to like what I said earlier, that like real life is always more interesting than fiction. And so I just, you know, I think I probably asked too many questions. That probably sets you up to be a good reporter when you're a kid. But yeah, telling stories. And then you realize very quickly that like, it's so important what journalists do. You know, we think about it as telling stories, but like, it's keeping people accountable. It's making sure people know what's going on in their community. And that's really, really important. You know, like people knowing what's happening at the county commission, what's happening at town hall, what's happening in the police department, what's happening at the schools, seeing their kids' track results. Like that's all really important. So yeah, I mean, I think I was definitely more on the telling stories side, but I think once I really started getting into it, I realized that like the value is so, it's just so important.
Mm-hmm. I know we're sort of doing everything in reverse. Normally, for everybody who watches these podcasts, I sometimes do rundowns and go over things we can talk about. I decided we were already on the kick of journalism. We might as well save the good stuff about hockey a little bit later. But just going into the run of journalism, when did you know? Was there a story or a time in the office that you knew you made it into journalism?
When did I know? Oh gosh. I mean, there were moments that I knew that I loved it. You know, I pitched a story. There's an island in the middle of the Pocomoke River that has goats on it that Snow Hill feeds. And I was like, that's cool. And then I got a lift to the island from the public works director on, I think, his personal boat because they were feeding the goats. You know, you have these cool moments, but I think the flashiest story that I ever did, we'll do that one. And this, I left Politico shortly thereafter, but I wrote a story about how the Trump administration had put a lot of political appointees in at USDA who like didn't really have ag policy backgrounds. Like some of them were like, you know, they'd been good campaign volunteers and the administration had given them jobs, but they were coming from like selling phones at AT&T or like right out of college in like high profile positions. So I wrote that story, and Rachel Maddow picked it up on NBC, and all of a sudden my Twitter's blowing up. I didn't see it because I was I was doing something else. But all of a sudden my Twitter's blowing up. And then the same story ended up being in a, what's his name? Mike Lewis book. I'd have to look it up, but it's like one of these political books about like the beginning of the Trump administration that like everybody's, kind of liberal uncle reads. And yeah, I still haven't read that either. But all of a sudden, my dad calls one day and he's like, your work is like, you are in this book, you're quoted in this book, and your work is quoted. Like, my friend found it and gave me the copy at golf. Like, why didn't you tell me? I'm so sorry about that. I mean, I'd heard about it, but I haven't read it, so I couldn't tell you. So yeah, like that was probably the biggest, like, like I don't want to say that was the pinnacle because I think there were much more interesting things I did, but that was one of those like, oh yeah, that's me. Cool. Should remember the name of the
book. You mentioned the Politico. What was that like getting in there? And I know, of course, that's sort of among the creme de la creme of a lot of the news outlets, short of the major, sort of the dailies and like the Washington Post and things like that. How did you get there? And I guess, how would you best sum up that experience?
So I got lucky with the job there. Again, they were like launching this ag and food section, and I didn't think I was really qualified for that. But I had a friend there who was like, what Politico doesn't realize, because they didn't have any expertise in this and we're just hiring at, is that they need someone who can speak A, about rural communities, and B, about water and pesticides and chemicals and clean air and stuff like that. And so I just got really lucky. And, it's one of those, I think there's a lot of moments in life that remind us to like be kind and, be the best you can be around everybody, because eventually that comes back to help you. And it's not the reason you should do it, but, like being a good colleague, being a good friend, getting to know people, like pays off. And basically I had a colleague at my first job in DC who'd already gone over to Politico, who was like, again, they don't know that they need someone with this expertise, but they do. So send me your resume. So I got really lucky. And working at Politico is just, it is an energy that like, it just doesn't sleep. And sometimes that's great. And sometimes it's, exhausting as we know journalism can be. Sometimes you kind of just want a weekend, or, you kind of just want to be done at a reasonable time, but the news isn't like that. And that's, neither good nor bad. I think that's litigated on both sides a lot. But yeah, it's just this really intense energy, and it feels like the center of the universe when you're there. And then when you leave, you're like, oh, okay, it wasn't, but it really did feel like it when I was there. So it was a really great experience. I learned a lot. I got to do really interesting things. I got to write about interesting things and go interesting places. So I'm really glad I had that experience. But yeah, when you're there, it just, and I think as a journalist, you have to believe that what you're doing is one of the most important things. And that's for many reasons, including that, especially at the time, the kind of like false news narrative, like, well, the alternative is potentially no news. And that's not good. And you work so hard, and journalism is not a high paying industry. So like, you have to believe in what you do to put the time and effort into it that it needs, kind of for like effectively, the pay and the hours and kind of what you're dealing with there. So
what would you say is the biggest sin a journalist can commit? I know there's so many different things, and everybody will have a different philosophy and thought on that. But to you, what would you say is the biggest sin that a journalist could commit?
Like, I think, fabricating anything. It's like fabricating and burning a source. Those are the two things. And it's been interesting since I've left journalism on the kind of burning a source thing. Since I've left journalism and job interviews, I'll get asked like, well, you were a journalist, like things are confidential here. Like, we don't share everything. And it's like, do you think anyone would have talked to me, if all I did was like share everything they told me and like never go off the record and like never keep anything, like, are you crazy? But yeah, so I mean, obviously you should never fabricate. Maybe that one goes without saying, but like, you know, we all know the high profile, like Jason Blair's of the world, or that really bad, fifth season of The Wire where he fabricates a story and then McNulty gets involved. Anyway, and then, but yeah, burning a source is pretty bad. It's not worth it. It's never worth it.
Yeah, and it's tough where sometimes you're in the newsroom you want to talk about, but you know you can't say anything. Maybe you tend to use vague terms like, "Oh, this so and so, I heard this thing and this," but don't use names, or you don't say descriptively what said thing was. And you know, again, definitely fabricating, you know, making up stuff. Those things, I think, if it had to be on top, burning the source is number one.
Yeah, so you'd go burning a source first?
Burning a source to fabricate. I mean, I never fabricated, but I know this. You end up getting left out a lot of news if you burn a source, but you can get a scoop sometimes. I remember this one reporter ended up, they kept trying to get her to tell her source, but she was able to well, I mean, and we try not as journalists to do shady things to get stuff, but you try to use your wiles and your will and your wits to try to get that edge, even though I feel like in Salisbury sometimes it didn't matter as much, because really not like the TV station was going to really care enough to run some big news, but you can get the jump on somebody else that, you know, and that's another thing I think about. I know I'm sort of going on a tangent here, but when it comes to print journalism versus television journalism, the big thing is, I feel like with TV journalism, it's gone like that. It's maybe a 15 to 20 second blurb and it's gone. But when you're writing something, it's there. That information's there. You get a little more space, even though when you think about it, you don't get as much space as you really feel like you should, because 300 words. That's it. We don't need any more than that. If we needed something else, you'll have to do a weekend enterprise story that you work like 3 weeks on while still doing daily stories, because that's how it works. But yeah, I always feel like this. I feel like there's a fine line between as a print journalist, just trying to get covet sources and things like that. Don't burn them, because, you know, as you mentioned, isn't along the same lines of being nice, even though you don't do it for that ulterior motive. It just happens. As long as you do right by people, things happen, and you know, things sort of turn up in your favor sometimes, because we've probably heard some people who, maybe even people in our own newsroom, that you know, didn't align themselves with other some of their sources, and you hear very unkind things about them. I will leave that vaguely open, because it happened before. It happened probably while you were here, and it definitely happened after you were here, after you were gone. So I've heard that about some other people.
Yeah, it's like in life, just don't get a reputation. Just like, you put it better, like, do right by people. Just don't get a reputation at all, like, unless it's a very good one. But like, generally, I feel like we approach reputations with like kind of negative. So just like, do right by people and don't get a reputation, and probably good advice for life. But yeah, there's a lot of places to go awry.
Mm-hmm. And I know that, of course, in journalism, wherever you're at, you're always in the trench with your coworkers, because either it's something against management sometimes, or it's just the you know, we probably had our things where we just like, Joe Barrel's full of it and stuff like that. And I just use that name because, again, the odds that he's listening, well, if you're listening, hey, thanks for your support. But other than that, you know, we just use that example because that seemed to tend to be very, especially in Wycomico County, that tended to be the biggest issue. It's just like everybody's attacking the paper, especially for some of the I guess some of the false narratives thought that were put out, even though I'm going to go too far deep. I'm just going to leave it at that. Some false narratives, because there are stories of certain people giving stories to certain bloggers, but I'll leave it at that. I really will, because I will tell everybody's business. How do I say?
It was such a wild time, like all of that. Like, I remember what you're talking about. It's crazy. If anyone wants to know, a Brazilian woman just won the women's marathon swim. Well, I'm sure this is recorded. I'm watching NBC Sports, but I told you I was watching the Olympics in the background, and they were swimming for 2 hours.
That means when they replay it tonight, it's going to probably go like highlights and maybe the last 15 minutes or so of it. That's
unfortunate, very unfortunate. But like, can you imagine swimming for 2 hours? Anyway,
I can barely imagine swimming for 10 minutes. I'm
not a swimmer, but it just feels like swimming for 2 hours is crazy. Anyway.
Oh yeah, I know it's weird, and I don't want to say it like this. And I look back on our experiences and journalism. I look at the Daily Times fondly. I feel like I keep following. Sometimes I look at stuff and I'm like, oh, this probably isn't normal. I've seen things in toxic environments, but I'm like, it's whatever. I just keep moving, and it's like for a certain point, and I'll say it in the newspaper, and probably a lot of people will agree. It felt like a little bit of a toxic environment there, and it just some of the stuff that shouldn't be happening in a newsroom did happen, but that stuff sort of got cleaned up around 2011, 2012. But that's from what I saw there in Salisbury. And I probably know a lot of people off the record who probably agree. But yeah, sometimes that environment was a tad unprofessional.
Well, it also just like, and not to like, I don't know, necessarily excuse behavior, but it was such a weird time to be at a newspaper, right? Like the bottom dropped out in 2008. And so I remember I started and in June, and I think someone started at like the Bethany office or something like that. I could be getting it totally wrong, but like somebody started like 2 to 4 weeks after me. And then 6 weeks after I started, we had our first round of layoffs, and I kept my job and that person lost theirs. And I just got lucky, right? Like I was the second to last in instead of the last in. But like, I just, it was such a weird time to be at a community paper because like what we were doing was so important, and like what was going on in these communities, in terms of, housing prices and people losing their jobs and like people losing their homes, like that was really, really important and needed to be covered. But at the same time, like I didn't get a raise while I worked for the Daily Times. Like I, made so little, and like it was just a constant cut. Like I remember we would all get furloughed, and we realized pretty quickly that like if you took your furlough in more than 2-day increments, you could file for unemployment from the state. And so like, just like or what we, when Dogfish still gave away beer for free, would go up to there on our furlough days. I think Serga and I and a couple other people did that once. Like, but it was just such a weird, and like I think now journalism, it seems to be figuring some things out. I don't know if as an industry it's figured everything out, but like that model of how to keep going, because it just fell apart then. But I also think, and I think we say this is again coverings, but newsrooms are strange places where you work all the time, and personalities grow, and sometimes people become editors, and this is from later jobs for me, but people become editors who maybe shouldn't really be managing people, but you're a really good reporter, and so that's the obvious next step. And so it's a strange industry like that. But again, it's like one of the best. I get asked every once in a while, like some college kid or someone's friend from whatever will kind of reach out to talk about like career advice. And I can give no career advice, right? Like you'll figure it out. It's my best career advice. But like I say that, I do think that like if you are thinking about being a journalist, you should go and be a journalist, because you will learn more doing that than you will anything else. So it's my casual plug for journalism and my career advice that is not career advice. So.
Oh no, yeah, and I agree with that. I also think that when it comes to journalism, just be ready for the grind. If you really love it, it may not love you back a lot, but eventually it can pay off sometimes. I mean, and the biggest thing is, and this probably goes for everything in life, shoot your shot. If there's an opportunity you want, go for it, because the odds are you may not feel like you're skilled enough, but if they love you enough, they will hire you and they will train you for it. I think that's the biggest thing. Anybody who's ever hesitant about maybe either it's just sort of not being the big fish in a little pond anymore thing, or just sort of fear of change. If you go for it, I mean, there's odds that you're gonna, you may not get the job, because if other people vying for that job, it's going to come down to a particular thing. But if it's how much a potential hirer will love you and want you to be there, sometimes that's all that matters. I mean, and I know you talked about the layoffs. I've told this, and I call it, as I mentioned to Ricky Pollitt, I call it the Bowser moment. I go to Super Mario Brothers, the first Super Mario Brothers for Nintendo, where you're in Bowser's castle and you're trying to get over the bridge. You pull the axe and Bowser is standing there as the bridge falls out and he falls into the lava. That is the Bowser moments are those unexplained moments where, well, not even unexplained, are those moments where you get caught flat-footed, especially when it comes to layoffs. Those are the things where it's like, well, you thought you were safe, you're not safe. I mean, I can imagine the days, and it happened when I was at the News Journal too. Somebody got let go. A couple people got let go while they were off on their off day.
Oh my gosh! Right? Oh,
yeah,
such a bad time.
We've seen couples get let go, and I remember that specific day. Which again, I see them both go out that same day. They were both, let go, and I think one was hired back, but it's crazy. Funny they're married now, but that's how it is.
Those newspaper relationships, right? Like, that's a common thing. The newsroom relationships, like, oh, we're together all the time, so we should just date. It's cool. My God, yeah, no, it was a weird time. It's a tough industry, but it's great for as long as you can do it.
When did you feel it was time to get out of journalism?
Again, late 2017. I just kind of looked around, or probably mid 2017, and I actually wasn't committed to getting out of journalism. I knew I wanted to do something different, and I knew I knew that I was ready to leave Politico and kind of look for really just a saner pace, a saner work-life balance. And I think people use that too much, but I was working the same hours that my friends who worked for really high-powered law firms were working, but they were making 6 times the salary that I was. And so it's if you don't have time to go to the grocery store and clean your house, I couldn't afford to pay someone to do that. So so I kind of looked around, and I really wasn't actually committed to leaving journalism. I actually went to the Congressional Research Service because I was I think I can do this and figure out what to do next. I don't totally feel like taking another journalism job right now because I know what that entails. But if I go to this place that is nonpartisan, I won't be branded as anything. I'm not, going in-house somewhere to, do communications or something like that. I can do this for a couple of years, figure out what I want to do. And I really expected to go back to journalism. And then I got there, and I kind of continued to job hunt once I got there. And every job I saw, I was just nope, the journalism jobs just aren't there. But the thing you learn, well, one of the many things you learn as a journalist, right? Or one of the many things you defend as a journalist is your role in the First Amendment, right? Freedom of the press. But as I sat and looked around, and again had this head filled with policy knowledge and the workings of DC, the other thing that's in the First Amendment is the right to advocate to the government. It's effectively the right to lobby. And so I just kind of, how we tell stories and how we think about stories is a big thing in journalism, but it's not the only place that we do that. And I think the other problem, as I kind of stepped back and took a breather during my year in government, was as a journalist, you sit there and see all the things that are wrong, all of the places where governments or police forces or individuals or coaches or whatever, all of the places where you're that's a really bad idea. We'll pick on a sports example. There was the report that came out today about the NCAA and how it just shamelessly was biased towards men's teams in the NCAA basketball tournament. We all saw those pictures on Twitter, last year of the women's pile of yoga mats and 2 free weights for the NCAA tournament versus the men's situation, or the food and all of this. And I didn't need a private investigator to come out with this report today that was yeah, NCAA, you are totally crippling the women's program for the men's program. Like, you saw those pictures, you could see other things. I went to the University of Maryland, which has a wonderful women's basketball program, frankly, better than the men's program, because the men always choke and the women under Brenda Freese do real well. But you could see even on campus the resources like that were put toward the men versus the women. And so, like, when you're a journalist, you sit there and you write about it, but sometimes you just want to scream, like, the hell are you doing? and kind of point out in like an opinionated way. Like, you can obviously do it in like an unbiased way in journalism, but like, how they should fix it. And journalists don't always, like, journalists know everything about what they're about the thing they cover. Like, no one knew Worcester County government better than me when I was, I guess the commissioners might have, but like outside of the government building, very few people knew it better than I did. But you don't get to say as a journalist, like, here's the solution. Like, not in the way you'd like to say it. If you find someone else who'll say it, you're fine. But like, generally you don't. So when I decided, I did my year in government, my like hangout year basically, I was like, let's go try and solve some of these issues. Like, let's go try, like, if I've sat there and thought to myself, like, you idiot, what are you doing? But not been able to either say or write that, like, let's go do that. Let's see what that's like. And so that's kind of what I do now. I get to, I've done it in-house, and now I do it kind of as an advisory role, as a consulting role, but just kind of try and say what the solutions are, like tell people what I think the answer is, which, you just don't always get to do as a journalist, which is tough.
I know the columnist, being a columnist, I know a lot of people tend to, and I think this is probably the biggest display of ignorance of people who read news and consider opinion as fact when it is just opinion. And like I said, I think that's another thing. Columnists, I think that opportunity to be a columnist is interesting. Some people can revel in it. Some people always have something to say about it, and where, again, that's their objective opinion about a particular thing. But I know some people tend to try to stay away that I'm here. Here's the news. You read it. This is what they said. This is what they said. You decide the facts. The true impartiality, as opposed to some media outlets that say that you should decide. But was doing columns, being a columnist, writing things like that. Did that ever cross your mind?
Yeah, I think so I was a columnist in my high school paper, just casual plug for myself, 20 odd years ago. And I enjoyed that. And I thought about that. I just, like, I'm not sure how you break into being a columnist. Like, maybe it's just, that's in like DC. Like, if I'd gone somewhere else, I could have tried to do that. But yeah, I never like got that far, I guess. Because some people do it really, really well, right? And you've got like some columnists, like the Dana Milbanks of the world, who are very funny about it, or there's others that like point out the problem in a very like factual news way, and then point out the solution as well. But that's really an art form, and I don't know if I was quite there. So now I just try and problem solve from the outside.
Yeah, I was always curious about that, because I know some people before feel like, oh yeah, I'd love to write a column, but man, you got to cut your teeth first before you can get that opportunity. Maybe some places, smaller places, you get that opportunity if you're doing both. But I mean, I don't know. That's problem. I mean, I wrote, even at the Daily Times, I wrote columns just sort of, on the Redskins or the Orioles or something like that. And even then, that was just such a tedious thing. And I love writing, and I love researching, and just, especially when it comes to sports stuff, I love getting the information, statistics, just looking stuff up, because I'm the type of person that can go down a Wikipedia or some type of rabbit hole and end up going hours. I remember the weirdest one, I was reading about the highway system, and I ended up getting to the history of crack cocaine. I don't know how it happened, but it just did. And it's some of the weirdest stuff that you would never expect. But I feel like and also you have to crank out columns, constantly. And it's like, sometimes you just don't have anything to write.
Well, and sports is always said to be the like different one, right? Because like inherently, like you like covering the Redskins from Salisbury or pick one, right? Like, but you know, Salisbury cares about the outcomes of the Redskins, sorry, Washington football team, because really, cares about the Washington football team. I'm dating myself there, not that I haven't already. You're like the papers in this region are biased towards wanting the Washington football team to win, which when I moved to DC, I became a blanket Washington sports fan, except for the Washington football team, because I was like, Dan Snyder's a jerk. And we all know that. And I don't like football enough to even pretend to care. This backing up, this is all to say that, like inherently, like there's some biases when you're doing, like same as if you're covering a Snow Hill track meet, right? Like you're covering Snow Hill. You kind of like your readers want Snow Hill to win. So sports is kind of interesting on that. But I will say I'm kind of shocked that you ever needed to look up any sports data, just anything. Like I think I mentioned this. I definitely listened to a couple episodes of this before coming on just to see, and I just, like, what was the color of the Memphis Grizzlies jersey in 1976? And you're like, oh, well, obviously it's.
I'll tell you, there's so many, and technically that is a trick question because the Grizzlies did not exist until 1995, but when they were in Vancouver.
You're still proving my point.
But yeah, it's crazy. And I go into the researching of sports. I used to read sports books. Oh, well, I always tell the people this. I used to have a bookshelf right beside my bed when I was a kid. They were full of Encyclopedia Britannicas and these red and black encyclopedias, Compton's Encyclopedia. I remember gold letters on the side with the top part black, and you have a little bit of red in the middle with the number and gold. And again, they were pretty outdated very quickly, as most printed books are. They were no good after 1987 because by 1990 it still had Reagan as a president. So those things, I would read those things constantly. And then when I started going to school, I wasn't really big into sports then. I honestly, my thing was just watching game shows all the time. And man, you name one, I probably watched it. And then I started getting into sports, watching ESPN a little bit when I was about 11. So basically, I picked up stats from there. I would watch every sport, every team, well, except for soccer. I still don't like soccer, never liked it then. But then I would read the books. They were these white NBA books. They had them in the library, hardcover, maybe about 20, 30 pages. I would read everything about every team inside and out. Of course, it was up to 1991. So to find an Orlando Magic book was tough enough because they had just came into the league in like 89 or 90. And I would just read about every single one of those. And then, like I said, aside from that, it was just... I always wanted to be a history major too, because of course, when I went to school, they had no history department. So after a major change, I became an English major. So,
well, so my family's encyclopedia growing up was from 1968. It was like big old Encyclopedia Britannica, which I'm sure was very expensive. My parents got it used at some point. Like I'm sure it was like the full like huge volume. But yes, the moon landing hadn't happened yet. This is problematic.
Speaking of things, I haven't told this story, but a friend of mine I met in college. Me and him were like the best of friends, and like he was at a wedding and all these other things. And we had this night. My wife is there. Me and my wife there. We're at his house, at his parents' house. He was still living there, like right after college. He found this board game of this old game show, Tic-Tac-Toe, not the 1980s version, but one from 1958. So this is pre-moon landing, pre-civil rights movement, pre-Motown, pre-Elvis, pre-Beatles, basically, color television.
Yeah.
And we spent almost 3 hours deadlock playing a game after game after game after game after game, because it's just like a tic-tac-toe board, and try to get 3 in a row. We just kept blocking each other for like 3 or 4 hours trying to play one full match. That was all.
That's great. That's pretty funny.
And he's an astrophysicist. He's a physics major. So trying to go to toe in a trivia battle with a physics major, that was insane.
Really, if I'm ever playing trivia somewhere and get a phone a friend, like you are definitely top of the list. Like, and my trivia, I'm not that great, but like not that trivia gets phone a friend, but like, and not that I cheat at trivia, but I'm just saying if I ever get one, you are my single phone call. I also appreciate that Ben Pinsurga has liked the tweet about my shout out to Ben Pinsurga. So there we go. I'll shout out again.
I didn't know if he saw it, but yeah, I just saw it as well, and that's a cool thing. I was like, well, she gave the shout out, so that has to be great. And so yeah, I know we talk about this, but I know you are big hockey. You played hockey, and I'm curious, how did you get interested in hockey, and where did that all start?
So I grew up in Southern Connecticut, and it's just like a big hockey place. Like there's just all of New England is, but like every town has a rink. And like on Friday night there were skating lessons and everyone learned how to skate, and all the moms kind of sat in the stands with like tumblers of like spiked hot chocolate basically and like hung out while we all skated, and then there was like a free skate afterward. So I learned how to skate as a kid because my mom wanted to sit and like chit chat with her, spiked hot chocolate with her friends who were the parents of my friends. And like I was fine at it. Like I was never gonna be a figure skater. I've always been kind of built like a tree trunk. So like, grace and poise are not my thing and never have been and never will be. So I like learned to skate. I again wasn't awful, was never gonna be a figure skater. My brother and I learned at the same time. He's only a year and a half older than me, so we kind of did all those things together. And he was just much better than I was. And I think he probably would have been a really good figure skater, but I think there was a lot of pressure on him to play hockey because that's what every 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old and 10-year-old boy in Southern Connecticut, or probably most of New England, is pressured into doing. So he played hockey and I showed no interest in it because no one really wants to be dragged around a cold rink when their brother's having fun and they just have to sit in the stands while their mom drinks some. No, she didn't drink that much spiked hot chocolate. I just feel like I should note that there wasn't that much in the hot chocolate. But anyway, so my brother played. He was never, he played like the town rec league hockey. And then in, I guess, winter of 1998, he was like, okay, I'm done. Like everybody else is more competitive and like more into this than I am. So I think I'm going to tag out. And of course, winter of 1998, speaking of the Olympics, was the first Winter Olympics that had women's ice hockey as a sport. So all of a sudden, I've plugged that I love the Olympics. The Winter Olympics happens to be my favorite because every sport is a person throwing their body down a sheet of ice in some way, shape, or form. Summer Olympics is great. I'm now watching Australia and the Russians play water polo, so that's going well. But there's that like added like sheet of iceness about the Winter Olympics. And so, we'd watch the hockey tournament and here you have the US and Canada in their first Olympic matchup, which like is still the best game. I would argue, and you're going to tell me I'm wrong and cite some crazy statistic about it, but I would argue that the USA women's or the USA Canada women's gold medal game, which it normally is them, is like one of the best games in sports every 4 years. Like it's just, there is so much history there. There's like, other teams like they're getting a lot better, but like for the longest time, women's hockey elsewhere just hasn't been on the same level. And like the times when the gold medal game is not USA Canada is when they're in the same bracket and knock each other out sooner. Like, so anyway, watch that. And the Canadians at the time had these crazy pink jerseys. And I was like, that's a bad idea. And I'm really glad women's sports has gotten past the pink. But so, yeah, so I watched that. And then that spring, my brother's like finishing his final season of Pee Wee hockey. And my father's so excited that he doesn't have to get up at, the crack of dawn to take my brother to the rink. And there was a flyer at the rink that said they were launching a girls' league. And I was like, I want to play. And my father was like, at least we have the gear, like we're not buying you anything new. But yeah, so I've kind of played on and off ever since. I played through middle school, I was good enough to make, and this is a resentment right here, I was good enough to make the travel team, like the like local girls travel team. And in Connecticut at the time, there were quite a few, and there was just happened to be like they were starting one out of the town that I lived in. And I made that when I was in 8th grade, and then I had to quit when I was in high school because my parents made me do marching band, and I'm still salty about it. So I played field hockey instead in high school, and that was a different game altogether. But I kept playing like rec league, women's or girls when I could. I played with the boys until probably like 17-ish, I think through junior year. And at that point, well, I guess junior year wasn't 17, but I played with the boys through junior year, just kind of like local rec league hockey. And at that point, like they just started to get significantly bigger than me. And I was as fast as them and potentially as good as them, but I wasn't faster or better. And so I just started getting injured because when you play contact hockey with people who are significantly larger than you, then that happens. So yeah. And then, so went to Maryland, didn't really think about playing hockey in Maryland. Doesn't have a full like university team. Sophomore year decided to play club hockey. And that was awesome, and made some of my like favorite people at Maryland, or made some of my best friends at Maryland playing hockey there. So did that for a couple of years. One of my misgivings about, or one of my like hesitations about moving to the shore was that I wouldn't be able to play hockey. And so I didn't play hockey when I was out there. But then when I moved back, the DC area has a pretty good like women's hockey community. There's quite a few people here of like all ages. There's a lot of learn to play programs, and then there's a lot of women who played in college, played D1, played club, played, in club at some, New England, upper Midwestern schools is, D something. So there's a lot of folks who play here. There's a really strong community. And so I was floating around through like rec leagues, and then I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I started playing I'm like an adult woman who plays for a travel hockey team, like kids do, like like every weekend I'm wherever, in normal times, of course, COVID put a damper on that. But so I play for a team now. My like regular season team is a team called the Washington Wolves. It's the best. It's so hard to make friends as an adult, and I feel really lucky that I stumbled into a great crew of friends playing hockey who are like the smartest and the coolest people, and I'm so lucky. And this is all to say that hockey is a super fun sport. Everyone should try it and just be okay with the bruises. And that also like adult sports are great because you make friends. So that's what I do now. We're hopefully heading into a season again this fall, kind of TBD to see what Delta does. And of course, DC just had a mask mandate put into effect. So our practice rink and our home ice is actually in the district. So we'll see what that means. But yeah, I'm like pretty hopeful that we're going to have a hockey season again this winter, because we didn't last year.
What positions did you play? Were you a defenseman? Did you play forward or?
I'm a forward. I play wing, and I'm pretty flexible on either side. But like I am one of those players. I am not the fastest. I am not like, also not good at talking myself up apparently. But I am one of those players who like I can figure out how to be in position, but I'm also like my skill set is getting in the way, right? Like and in any sport, you need people who get in the way of the other team, because that frees up other people to like do things like score and make nice plays. But so my particular, like if getting in the way got points, like be real high. It doesn't, but like screening goalies and like blocking shots, real good at all that. But yeah, so I play wing and pretty much always have.
How's your wrist shot and one-timer?
Given that I played last night just in like a local beer league, and given that I missed all my shots, I had like 3 breakaways and I didn't score on any of them. So needs some work. I'm going to blame COVID on that though. It's been a long off season.
How would you, if there was a scouting report, a Jenny Hopkinson scouting report on your hockey abilities, how would you, I guess, best describe your style of play? Plus, who did you try to emulate?
So I'll take the second one first. I am not a like bottomless pit of memorizing sports facts, and like I've never been good at like following teams. I'm also not good at like watching TV shows at the scheduled time that they're on. It's just like, I don't know, really the whole watching things on demand is really good for me. But so I've like, and growing up, like I grew up in Rangers territory. My family didn't really watch games. Like we went to them every once in a while, but like it wasn't a thing. So I'm like one of those people that like plays sports, but I don't really, like I don't watch them. I root for the Caps as part of my like blanket DC sports teams minus the Washington football team rule. And like going to Caps games, like I know who Ovechkin is and TJ Oshie, and like can pull the Caps players out of the lineup at this point in time. But yes, it's not like I'm like trying to be cool like someone else. This is the Jenny Hopkinson style of play. I don't know if there's a professional player that's like big on getting in the way. You know, but like, it's also always fun. Like, now that we have like women's hockey players are kind of becoming better known, and you've got like the Lamoureux twins, and you've got all these other people. So that's always really fun. And of course we have the fledgling WNHL. But yeah, I just don't watch enough hockey. Maybe I'd be better if I did. And again, my style of play is the getting in the way style of play. Like, and it works, right? Like if you are screening a goalie, like sometimes you get the goal off it. Like, I'm a like garbage goal getter and stuff like that, but they still count. So I'll defend that.
I agree to say you weren't the enforcer type on the ice, were you?
Well, I am sturdy. So I like, and like women's hockey is inherent, like has to be men's hockey players. Like it to a point has to be like faster and clean, like kind of crisper than men's hockey, because you can't just throw your body into someone to get a puck. Like you actually have to play the puck versus like play the man. I am like kind of taller in some cases and like sturdier than some people. And it's less in travel, but like when you play summer league and there's like different levels of play, I have to be really careful, because like if I think this is the case in a lot of sports, like when you're playing rec level, but like if I go up against a player who's like really new or like not that sturdy, like I'm gonna get the penalty because it's like I'm the sturdy one. So they're gonna run into me and I'm gonna be fine, and they're gonna fall over, and then the whistle's gonna blow. And I'm like, I just stay upright well. Like I didn't do anything, but that's fine, right?
It's reverse prison rules. Reverse prison rules, where you go in they always say attack the biggest person in the prison just to show that you're tough.
Yeah, basically. But it's less so when like, I play travel with the Wolves, then I everyone's very good, but yeah, got to be a little bit careful when you're playing like, beer summer league.
Mm-hmm. Did coaching ever did you ever think about coaching, or even not as a head coach, or even as an assistant or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be that good. I've not thought about it. I worry that I don't have enough. I think I'd like really basic learn to skate or learn to play clinics. I could probably be somewhat helpful, but I don't know if I'd be good enough to coach. Maybe that's not the thing to admit on a sports podcast, but then I also think there's a level of like knowing the technicality, like the technical side of like when you make a wrist shot, like at this point, and I'm not getting any better at hockey in part because I'm getting older, so it's like those like competing factors there. But like I know how to do a wrist shot. I know how to, like I know my body knows how to do all of that, but I don't always know that I can explain it to someone else. And I think to be a good coach, you have to be really good at being like, here's what you do, but like here's the pieces as to like how you do it. And I think I've played for so long at this point that like a lot of it is muscle memory, and I think that also means that a lot of the bad habits are there to stay. But yeah, I just think you're stuck with stuff at a certain time, and if you can't explain, like break down like a crossover, backward skating into like individual pieces and explain it to someone, like I can do all of those things, but I can do them because I've done them so many times. So
for anyone who decides to get into learning how to ice skate, what is the biggest piece of advice that you'd give them?
it's gonna hurt the first day. But I think ice skating, it's not like running either. Like people are like, oh, it's just like running on ice. It's not like running because you're going like out and back instead of just forward. It's my running with my hands for those people listening and not watching. But it's not the same as running on ice. It's like a different motion. But I think it's one of those things. I think the first day or two are the hardest, and then the learning curve is like it starts really steep and then tapers. I think it's, once you get over that hurdle of, getting those fundamentals down with a good coach who's not me, I think the learning curve is pretty straightforward.
So I know normally, as we've talked so much about hockey, I mean, I guess as we sort of go on and transition to a few other things, I guess the biggest question would be, if you didn't get into a journalism initially, what would you have done?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Your answer would be, I would be like a sports historian expert. I don't know. If I hadn't been a journalist, and again, like all I think I was really good at doing was writing. So I don't know if it would have been something writing related. I think I like my secret, I'm saying this on a podcast, but if I could have done anything, regardless of whether or not I would have been good at it, and this is very girly, but I think I would have loved to try a hand at being like a jewelry designer, like a jeweler. I think that would have been really fun and kind of speaks to like playing with things and playing with like different metals and different structures and stuff like that. And I always like the idea of doing that, but I never took an art class. Like I was into stuff like that as a kid, and then spent, high school and college writing. So, but yeah, that's my weird, if I'd done something else, I think I would have tried to do that.
So here's the thing. You would have thought it would have been in sports. Mine would have been one. I thought down the road, if journalism wasn't for me, and I know sports wasn't going to be for me, I would have loved to have been a television historian, just the history of television. And I watch far too much television, not as much now. But I would have loved just sort of go through the history of television and things like that. I've always got this mindset of, you can tell what makes a perfect sitcom just because there's like 5 character archetypes that goes through it. There's always the protagonist. Then you always have the oblivious / idiot character. You have the schemer / deviant would be the other one. Schemer / deviant. Then you have the person with the heart of gold, and then you have the hard ass. And they don't always have to be separate characters. They can be, a chunk of characters. But I use the perfect example with Night Court. That's an example where all the archetypes were separate. And then, they would the voice of reason. That's number 6 was the voice of reason. So that's a perfect example. Night Court was a perfect example of that. The other thing, I always wanted to be a game show host. That was one thing. And I wanted to be a TV executive because I see how people put together schedules, and I think that I can probably do much better than half of these people who work in the television industry now. But those are my those were my 3 things that I always had an interest in other than sports. Non-sports related, those would have been the things.
That's awesome. Those are good answers. And now every time I watch a sitcom, I'm gonna think about
it's serious. You watch any show. You can watch Seinfeld. You can watch. It doesn't matter what it is. From the newest one, some shows pull it off well, some don't. But like Taxi, we just went through binge watching and stuff. We watched Cheers, and the final 2 seasons of Cheers were horrible to get through. But watching Taxi, because they only have half of the 100 some odd episodes on streaming places, going through that, it went through so seamlessly. It felt like, even though it was like a show that was made 4 years before Cheers, it basically set like so many different archetypes and so many different character tropes that probably were done so well. And it was a show that had like a whole ton of stars that came out of that show.
Interesting. So I have a question for you. And
okay.
Thanks to the social medias, I saw that you're going to be a dad, right?
Yes.
There's going to be a little Earl around.
Yeah.
Is it a boy or a girl, or don't you know?
We'll find out. We'll find out August 21st. That is going to be the big thing. We're going to actually sort of do a bit of a gender reveal. We're going to have the sonogram before that, and then we're just going to try to be as stealth as, well, not stealthy, I guess, sort of and oblivious as possible about it, and just wait till the cake opens, shooting out a bunch of sprinkles or whatever color the funfetti cake will end up being. But yeah, I'm excited. I always tell people the biggest concern I had was just, I'm 38 now. Had it been like if I was 28, it'd be something different. I always worry about now. Will I have the energy to do it? And the kid I'll be 56 when the kid graduates. If everything works out right, I will be 56 when the kid graduates. But it's, that was my only one concern as a parent. And, you try to, and some people struggle with I'm trying to, some people struggle with conceiving and stuff like that. And that was something that it happened, but you just try not to, because then you always hear the biggest thing that you hate hearing a lot is, oh, when are you guys going to have a kid? Because then it's like, oh, well, if you knew what was going on, you probably wouldn't have asked that question. But I understand, it's sort of like, believe me, if they could just drop out of the sky, like the whole, I guess, the myth of the stork, it would work. But yeah, I'm excited about it, and I am looking forward to that opportunity. I mean, I know some people can see it as a weird thing. Why would you pass why would you want a little version of yourself, when I always can see it as pass along knowledge and stuff like that? I guess, some people will see it to build a better human, but other than that, it's just like,
Well, I'm very pumped for you. But I have to ask, what is the one sport you don't want your child to play? Like, what is the sport that you'd be like, I cannot watch this? Like, no, like little Earl comes to you and says, Dad, here's the thing I want to do. Like, what's the sport that you're like, oh?
That's the thing. My wife wouldn't want our child to play football. I'm sort of indifferent about it. My thing is this: if you get in early to play it, you don't want to be under the curve. I honestly don't have a sport that I would just say, no, this is non-negotiable. You are not playing this.
Like badminton or like, I don't know.
I would tell them that, hey, if you're going to play, you better make the effort in doing it, because we're not all going to keep being drug out here for you to either be mediocre or not want to play. And you play that one season, and if you don't like it, then we don't have to do it again. That's my whole thing. I don't want to be one of those sports dads, but I don't have a particular sport. If you want to play soccer, sure, I'll learn more about soccer. Soccer to me, and I say this, I watch hockey because I could tell you when I started watching hockey, I was watching the Caps, so I could tell you it was Don Beaupre in the goal for the Caps. It was Joey Juneau, Peter Bondra, Calle Johansson, Sylvain Cote, Keith Jones at one point before he was created for Chris Simon. And I could tell you, a little bit of the Caps stuff that I watched, but soccer to me is boring. It is the most boring sport. But if they want to play soccer, go ahead and play soccer. I have no particular preference on a sport.
I gotta make a plug for soccer here for a second. Mm-hmm. First of all, I would argue as a parent, soccer's a good one because there's very little gear, and like my parents had to pay for hockey gear. So like soccer, not that much gear, right? Like cleats, shin guards, ball, check. The other plug for soccer, and I'm gonna say this, and it's the wrong audience, but I'm gonna do it anyway. The problem with baseball and football is that you never know when it's going to end, right? Like, this is why I can't watch, again, I've already kind of gone after the Washington football team, but like, it doesn't help that like, I find football mind-numbing because the game could take 2 hours, it could take 4 hours, it could take 6 hours, same with baseball. So I would imagine, I am not the one becoming a parent here, but like, I'm going to make a plug for soccer. You know how long soccer takes? It's 90 minutes. Maybe 100. There's a halftime in the middle, a couple of minutes added on to the end. You can time your watch by it. So I think it's a fun game though. The women's, again, plugging my Olympic watching, the women's national team has been very boring this Olympics, but especially like given how much talent is there. So I agree, boring soccer games can be bad, but at least you know exactly when it's going to end.
That is the most television friendly thing because, like I said, they'll be done in under 2 hours, and you can go back to your day. That's pretty much when I was working in the newsroom in the news journal, like that the World Cup was on. It's like, man, but those games ended so quickly, and like, hey, you moved on your day until the next one came on, which is like, I don't know. I just soccer to me was boring, and it's funny. I'll ride on baseball all day. I'm an Orioles fan. My allegiances were pretty much all Washington teams except for baseball, just because growing up it was only the Redskins. I was born after the Colts left. No, I was born before the Colts left, but I didn't start following football until '94. So it was Washington. It was the Redskins, the Bullets, and the Caps, and the Orioles. Those are my teams. I will not change. I will not change either way. My allegiance will not go to the Nationals or to the Ravens. I stick with my 4 teams. I will die with those. But like I said, comparing baseball to football, honestly, the average length of a football game is probably the same average length of a baseball game, and there's just as much downtime in between when they're moving the chains, setting things up. The ref blows the whistle, gives the motion to go play in between, as there is in between a pitcher getting set, throwing a ball, and pitching ball and at bat. The time. There's much downtime. So anyone who says baseball is boring and is a diehard football fan is completely oblivious to how much downtime that is in between each play.
Hey, I am saying both are too slow. Like, I'm not trying to defend one over the other. I mean, I will go to a Nats game because it's a good social activity, but like, I'm not defending, and I of course won't go to a Washington sports football team game because, again, don't want my money going there and don't want like expired Delta peanuts or whatever it was. But yeah, I'm not defending either on the timing. I think both are too slow, and that probably explains why I play a sport that is also a very confined period of time. Like, it's not like basketball where you can foul out and make the last 5 minutes go on for 20 minutes. Like, no, you've got your 15 minutes stoppage here and there, but like, it's not dragging. You can't stop the clock and move the ball to the other, or move the puck to the other end of the ice. So I'm just saying that hockey is a better sport than all of them, and so clearly that's what your child should do. It's a long way getting to that point.
And now, of course, we've talked about a lot of things on the ice and hockey. Now it's time to ask ice-breaking questions, because it's funny that I go back to my time at UMES, and one of my my journalism teacher, Marilyn Burkle, she always had us interview media personalities, TV reporters, newspaper reporters, and just sort of come up with ice-breaking questions. Like, normally they'd ask us like, oh, give something that's out of the norm aside from their career. Just like, if you were color, what color of stuff, what color would you be? Stuff like that. I've never thought about what color I would be, but these are some of the ice-breaking questions I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
Who is the celebrity a lot of people say that you resemble?
Someone, when I was much younger, said I look like Alicia Silverstone from Clueless. And I was like, that's not true. But I'm going to go with that because someone once said it.
Okay. If you had someone star in a movie about your life, who would you have it be?
Earl, I'm not good with people's names. Who would star in a movie about my life? I don't know. Pass. Who do you think would play me in a movie about my life?
I'm trying to think. Because the thing is, it people, because there's a fine line. Some people say it's an actor they feel like can pull off the role, which technically that could be any actor that can pull off a role. You think like they can have a personality that matches. A good enough actor can match you. I mean, Daniel Day-Lewis could probably match any of us personality wise if you give him enough time. Who would I say? That's a pass on me because I can't think of anybody.
Okay, Daniel Day-Lewis. I will pick him to play me in a movie about my life.
If there was a movie about your life, what would the title be?
I'm
making you work here. I'm making you work.
I don't know. You are. If there was a movie about my life, it would be, something about a gin and tonic. Or maybe that's it. Actually, something about a gin and tonic would be the title of the movie about my life.
What would be the biggest advice that you would tell Jenny Hopkinson of 20 years ago?
Oh my gosh. is it not to worry. You know, like 20 years ago, I was 14 and like worried about where I was going to go to college and like worried about success. And like, I've kind of floated. I like, not everyone kind of does, right? Like you do something and then you figure out the next thing to do and it's fine. So I think I'd tell myself just, it'll work out. It's worked out thus far. So we'll go with that. Oh, and always wear sunscreen. Always wear sunscreen. Look at me. Always wear sunscreen. Listening on, I am so pale.
Of course, I always talked about beaches and stuff like that. I was like, I don't have much of a reason to tan, and it's just not gonna do me any good. But I always, it's always interesting when I hear people talk. Oh yeah, wear sunscreen or tan. I'm like,
yeah.
Well, that might not work for me, but it'll never work.
Lucky you don't have that.
Other problems, I always say like this thing. It's funny. I always think about this. I guess where we're at now and our age is like everything for us is like first world problems, not an issue of anything major. We're not worrying about, oh God, can we pay our bills or all of that stuff. It's like, oh man, will this Amazon package come when I'm here? So I don't have to worry about it sitting on the porch while I'm gone, stuff like that.
Yeah. Right. 20-year-old me should worry about Amazon packages being delivered. She didn't know what Amazon packages were, but like 20 years ago, if I could tell myself that, it's like try and time your Amazon deliveries. But yeah, no, it's to your point. It's like, I feel very lucky that like, I think I have been lucky. And so, yeah, so I guess I'm lucky that I'm telling myself 20 years ago, like it'll work out, which as an angsty teenager is probably not advice that you would take, but there you go. I'm very lucky for that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else because I always ask all these types of questions, and honestly, those are like the four that are like the brand new ones. Well, I don't know how many people are watching live, but let's throw this out. Favorite curse word? Because for the one person watching, for the people watching on Twitch, favorite curse word.
Do you know, like working in newsrooms, I used to swear so much. And so when I was my first job in DC covering the Obama administration, they would do Friday afternoon news dumps, like shamelessly, like just like they had to stop doing it because their press folks rioted and were like, we can't work until like 8 p.m. every Friday because at 4:30 so we used to call them F-bomb Fridays because there was just like, you could like time stuff to it. It'd be like, it's after 3 on a Friday. Like, what are they going to put out? Like, it was the worst. So I guess it's not, I'm trying to get past my F-bomb days, but I'd say F-bomb Fridays. It's all one word to me now.
Oh my gosh. I feel like there's so much more, and there's probably more stuff that I haven't even touched on. Anything that you would like to add? I know we're going to get to these shout outs and promoting stuff, but anything like you would add that you feel like people should know, whether it's about journalism, whether it's about hockey or anything else. I know you talked about your love for the Olympics and you prefer the Winter Olympics over the summer ones.
Yes, and now I'm watching the U.S. Women's water polo team beat Canada. They're at 9-2. If there's, I'm gonna change my mind on my answer for what job I would want. Lately, it has been to actually be a TV executive at NBC and stop rerunning the same like 5 games at the Olympics over and over again. I've seen the women's soccer like lose to Canada like 3 times. But yeah, that's not really an answer. Is there anything else I'd like people to know other than my weird obsession with the Olympics? And that I'm a recovering journalist who on most weekends chases a piece of plastic down a sheet of ice with a stick. No, that pretty much covers me.
Oh, I have asked, if you were to write a book about a particular topic, what would it be?
It would be a nonfiction book. I don't necessarily, I haven't found the story yet. Do you want to write a book? Like, because I want to write a book. It's like been one of those like kind of weird, like I feel like I have to, but like I would love to, and I'm just waiting for that story, to write a book about. And I don't know what that story is.
I actually am, and well, this is breaking news here. I am actually thinking about writing. Well, I'm thinking about. I started working on my outline of a book that is nonfiction, just sort of about going on.
Do
Well,
it.
just my run going on. Well, I about doing trivia contests and going on Sports Jeopardy and other pursuits of. I wouldn't say pursuits of folly, but other game show and trivia show pursuits and stuff like that. That's something. It's in the embryonic stages. I talked about doing it about a year or so ago, and then I wrote an outline, and then I stopped. I wrote a chunk of it one day, and then I was like, I'll get back to it eventually. And then a few weeks ago, I finished writing an outline, and now it's just me trying to put together recollections, probably using some of the blog posts I wrote and things like that, just to start that, and then up to present day. Hopefully, it would end as the next show that I get on.
I'm very excited for this. You need a punny title, sort of like the king of knowledge, like the Earl of knowledge.
I already got one.
Can you
called,
share it, or is it too soon?
Oh no, it's fine. I call it Joy Buzzer.
Oh.
Joy Buzzer. My journey in trivia with the friends and money I made.
I like that.
Something like that. I have to tighten it up, but yeah, Joy Buzzer. That's already the title, working title that I'm going with.
I'm looking forward to the day I get to order an advance copy.
Oh yeah, it's funny. I have a friend. Before we wrap this up, an interesting story. My friend who's a physics major, he does his own Twitch channel, and I watch him most times. And so he follows a lot of people who do like live streams of people do their own, I guess, web version of game shows. So I'm sitting in there watching people play sports themed Jeopardy, and then I'm just sitting there watching, and it's like, because the thing about Sports Jeopardy was it wasn't on, like, if it were on Hulu or Netflix, it probably would have done better instead of being on Crackle. And the problem was that so few people saw it, except for the last Winter Olympics, because they would show episodes late at night on NBC Sports Network. And then, like, because I'm just sitting up late at night, like, oh yeah, well, there's my episode. But and it was crazy when I was sitting in there watching those streams of those guys, and my friend mentioned I was there, and like, oh, the Earl Holland, the one who won 8 times on Sports Jeopardy. I'm like, I didn't think anybody actually watched, other than like the few people that said they did, and family. So yeah, you're sort of amazed by people who actually watch that stuff. Who actually watched it, because you didn't think really anybody watched it, because if it was popular enough, it probably still would be going, or if Sony knew what they were doing, it still would have been going. In fact, I guess I was in Sports Illustrated, so sure, it wasn't as a writer, but it was about the whole Sports Jeopardy experience, which again, I have to send all those links later. But yeah, those are the most insane things. You just never expect stuff like that. It's like weird things happen when weird things happen. You never expect it.
It's cool, right? This thing called life. Pretty cool. Nope. That's awesome. I'm pumped for the book. Yeah, I'm here for it.
Now my biggest enemy will be procrastination. That's the biggest thing. I'll put it together, and I was telling a friend of mine, because she had talked about the thing. Oh, you should write a book about it a long time ago, and I was like, yeah, maybe. And then I just sent her the outline a few weeks ago. Hopefully, it's a start. But yeah, it's we could talk a little more about that off air. But one thing before we go, I want to get 6 seconds of silence, because I completely forgot when I was trying to do everything in the show prep. But for right now, everybody, 6 seconds of silence right now. But yeah, before we wrap this up, Jenny, do you have any shout outs to anybody, anything you'd like to promote as well?
I just want to tell Ben that I am happy to come on a movies and meals podcast, but I know almost nothing about movies. So I'm happy to come on and shoot the shit. I'm good at that, clearly. But this has been, so anyway, Ben, we'll chat. I'm accepting the invitation. I'll tweet about it later. This has been a blast. Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to reconnect. I hope other people had as much fun as we did going down memory lane on this one.
Oh yeah, I think this is eventually when I chop this all up. I'm going to eventually the full episode, and then I'm just going to do a full-fledged journalism episode with like a bunch of Daily Times folks, just talking about journalism and their thoughts on it, because that'll be a deep dive journalism one, especially.
I'm looking forward to that. It's like that like era that we were there together. Like we're such fun people, and like I again super excited when you reached out, and like very fondly look back at like the people and the folks and the just like flag football games and like stupid things we did. I think we played beer pong on my deck one Saturday.
Yeah.
Like, we had a good time.
I wish we could have got you to play softball, because that way, especially a co-ed softball one, because that was tough to get a whole team together, because that's what we learned in the end. It's like you never have enough women playing co-ed softball, because we had so many forfeits because we didn't have enough women to play.
Look, when it comes to softball, I'm a good warm body, but I'm shit at
it. Hey, warm body's good enough. And like I said, sometimes you got to learn on the fly. That's how we did in journalism. That's how you do it in softball.
Also true.
Yeah, but Jenny, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on the show. What we'll do is we'll wrap this up, and after this, we'll do a quick debriefing and things like that. For everybody who's been watching, I really appreciate it. I know people have been watching on and off on all three. At one point, we had people watching on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube as well. And we really appreciate that. If I can get that out of my mouth, we really appreciate that. And we ask everybody, if you watch it, if you like it enough, give us a comment in your local podcast app, if you got Apple and things like that. Or if you've got, if you know somebody who might think this is interesting, give it a share. But I really appreciate it again for my guest, Jenny Hopkinson. I am Earl Holland. We'll be back very soon with another live stream. For everybody, keep your eye on the socials. And for everyone who's been here, have a good night, and we'll see you next time.